Hey y'all, welcome to the Southern Appalachian Herbal Podcast. I'm Judson Carroll and I'm an herbalist. I'm also a wild crafter, a gardener, and herb grower. I'm coming to you from high atop the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, just a stone's throw from the Tennessee line, overlooking the Pisgah National Forest, absolutely surrounded by the bounty of God's green earth. I spent most of my life wandering these mountains and learning about plants from the old timers and all sorts of characters. On this show, we'll talk about herbs and how to use them, how to find them, how to grow them, how to make preparations. We'll talk about a lot of things. We can also talk about permaculture, homesteading, foraging, and living off the land. Most anything, really. You can email me at southernappalachianherbs@gmail.com if you have a question or a comment. You can also contact me through the Grow Network, where I'm a regular contributor and a moderator for the forums. And my blog is, of course, southernappalachianherbs@blogspot.com. All right, y'all. I'm going to sit my guitar down and let's talk about herbs. Hey, y'all. Welcome to this week's show. Today, we're going to discuss one of the most varied, interesting, and useful of all the herbal plant families. It's what Thomas J. Elpel in his book Botany in a Day referred to as the chamomile tribe. Now, we're all familiar with chamomile. I mean, that's probably the main herb most people remember from their childhood because chamomile is an excellent remedy for soothing indigestion, bronchial complaints, colic, used a lot for small children. But there that's by no means the extent of the chamomile family. It's actually a subclass of the asters. And I'll read a little bit from what Mr. Elpel says here. He says the chamomile tribe includes some of the most richly aromatic plants in the aster family. The other distinguishing characteristic is that the bracts surrounding the flower base are somewhat scarious, meaning that they are thin, dry, and translucent, which may be more apparent when fully dried. Please note that members of the everlasting tribe also have scarious bracts, but are much more translucent. But the plant lacks the odor characteristics of the chamomile. If your specimen has both the odor and the translucent bracts, then it belongs to the chamomile. Now, these are actually pretty easy to identify. One of the most common herbs used in herbal medicine is yarrow. Yarrow is a member of the chamomile tribe. It's Achillea millefolium, I believe. It's named after the legend that you remember the story of Achilles' heel. You know, Achilles is wounded in the heel, and he used yarrow to staunch his own bleeding. And supposedly before then, he was using it to stop the bleeding of his soldiers who were wounded in battle. Yarrow that is principally used for stopping bleeding. But yarrow is a fascinating herb. It's a bit what we call an energetic herb. It, if served as a hot tea, or you could take tincture and put it in hot water, served hot, it increases secretions. It will actually bring on menses, so it would increase bleeding in that situation. It increases all the secretions. If taken cold, it decreases. It stops internal bleeding. It stops external bleeding when used basically as a poultice. In that instance, the best way to use it is to take the dried yarrow plant, just crumbled up, put it straight on the wound and cover it with a bandage. You might want to soak it in a little hot water first, but I mean, your blood soaks into it and it really works best that way. Some people say it can be used as a tincture or a tea for stopping bleeding. I haven't had opportunity to use it in that form, so I can't attest to it. Mr. Elpel says yarrow contains a volatile oil and bitter principles. It is astringent, diuretic, and diaphoretic. The Latin name, well, here we go. The Latin name comes from the warrior Achilles, who reputedly used yarrow to stop the bleeding from wounded soldiers. Internally, the tea can be used to decrease menstruation or shrink hemorrhoids, also after birth. It is apparently a lactose stimulant. It is also used to ease the transition of menopause. I have found that a little yarrow tincture on a tissue stuffed up the nostril will stop a bloody nose in seconds. My grandma always gave me yarrow tea with honey when I had a cold, or sometimes just to enjoy. Reason yarrow is often used for a cold is because it's a good diaphoretic. When taken hot, it induces sweating. Remember how I said hot yarrow increases secretions? Well, in this case, taken hot, it causes sweating and helps break the fever. You probably have yarrow growing somewhere near you. I know my yard is full of it. It's my excuse not to cut the grass as often as I probably should because the yarrow grows up, and when it gets big enough, I'll harvest it and then I cut the grass. Otherwise, I would be wasting tons of very valuable herbs. Um, Yarrow just being one of the herbs that grows in my lawn, so to speak. I have sort of a wild lawn, but I have tons of yarrow. Okay, so what does yarrow look like? Remember the name millefolium. Okay, that's because the leaves are really almost fern-like. If you look at a yarrow leaf, is actually made up of millions of little parts. It's unique. It's I don't even know how to describe the complexity of it, but yarrow, the leaf is just very unique. The flower could at first look like wild carrot or baby's breath, but upon closer inspection, you see that it's not in the umbel type heads of wild carrot. They're actually individual flowers that are just tightly bunched, and they'll often be yellow, but in my yard they're white. I think there's a pink variety. Yarrow comes in different colors, but it's a really good herb. When you pick it and you smell it, it has sort of a sagey smell. You'll smell it immediately because the oils come right off on your hands. And it's just a real easy herb to find, a real easy herb to use, and it grows just about everywhere. Um, I think in Seven Songs Herbal First Aid course, he said that he doesn't even bother carrying yarrow with him in his first aid pack because he can always find some growing somewhere. All right, next we have Anthemus. This is chamomile. Chamomile tea is used as an antispasmodic and carminative for the digestive system or as a mild sedative, especially for restless children. The flowers can be used in a rubbing oil on painful joints. It is also useful for migraine headaches. Like I said, we probably all had experience with chamomile. You've got the Roman chamomile and the German chamomile. The flowers of chamomile are really unique in that they smell like apples. That's how you know whether you have fresh chamomile or not. Fresh chamomile smells so strongly of apples. And in fact, it was called in ancient times ground apple. So when you're looking for chamomile, remember it's going to have those white flowers with a large protruding, yellow in the middle, and the smell will be of apples. So it's pretty easy to identify that one. And it's also very good for colds. It's a little more mild in its effects than yarrow when it comes for breaking a fever, but it's useful as well. It's a good herb. You should always have some chamomile either growing or some dried somewhere because it's one of those just like almost an all-purpose type herb. I mean, it's like, you've got an upset stomach, you got a fever, you got headache, you got a fussy baby or whatever, you grab some chamomile. It's just one of those, good ones to have at hand. Probably the most fascinating member of the family are the artemisias. Simply put, artemisias are wormwood, mugwort, southernwood. Now that's an interesting one people don't talk about a whole lot. American sagebrush, what we call tumbleweeds and sage. That's not culinary sage, it's not garden sage, it's actually an artemisia. It's a wormwood. The white sage, you know what I'm talking about. You see it in anything that has a Western theme or a Southwestern theme. You see that white sage. It's often used by Native Americans for smudging or, burning like an incense, essentially to basically dispel negative energies. If you want to look at it that way. The artemisias may be one of the oldest herbs used by mankind. There is documentation going as far back as written documentation goes. The artemisias, especially wormwood, hence the name wormwood, were useful for getting rid of worms. It has insecticidal or anti-worm properties, vermifuge properties. It is very likely that our ancestors discovered that wormwood was good for that purpose, for killing bugs essentially. And they began putting it into water to help purify water. And that may actually be the invention of herbal tea right there. And then came mugwort. Mugwort, so called because it is a bittering agent. It was used to bitter beer. Before St. Hildegard von Bingen introduced hops for beer making, people used mugwort. Mugwort is a fascinating herb. Mugwort not only has most of the properties of wormwood, but it is more mild in effect. Wormwood is stronger. Mugwort also has the unique ability, this has been recorded throughout history, um, for helping people not focus on negative memories. It was traditionally given to people who were mourning the loss of a loved one or who had been through a traumatic experience. Somehow, mugwort just kind of helps the brain get over a trauma. Uh, Nobody knows how it works. Okay, mugwort also, when burned as an incense, gives people more vivid and what we call lucid dreams. Like you can actively will yourself to participate in the dream and remember it afterwards. Mugwort has just for those reasons has all kinds of history and uses by different peoples as an almost magical herb. But we can think of it as a great antiviral. We can think of it as a great digestive stimulant, a good herb for the liver. It has so many properties. And then, well, let's see what Mr. Opal says about this family. The artemisias. He includes in here sagebrush, wormwood, and tarragon. He says that artemisias are prolific all over the West. He says we have 6 different species just growing on our 5-acre homestead in southwest Montana. Wow. Some species are commonly used as a smudge for purification before entering sweat lodges and other ceremonial events. Please note that the artemisia species are not related to culinary sage, which belongs to the mint family. The artemisias contain potent volatile oils, some tannins, and bitter substance. Medicinally, bitter tea acts as a digestive aid, but the volatile oils in some species can lead to permanent nervous disorders with prolonged use. The artemisias are useful as a menstrual stimulant and as a vermifuge, that means it kills worms. Some species of artemisias will decrease the effects of rancid fats on the liver. One of the more familiar artemisias, one of the artemisias you may be more familiar with, is tarragon. That is a wonderful culinary herb that we use in tartar sauce and hollandaise sauces and very commonly used in French cooking. But he mentioned there about some species of artemisia, volatile oils can have very harmful effects. Well, that's those volatile oils are probably present in all of them. Very strong in wormwood proper. Wormwood is actually most famous these days, having been the main ingredient in absinthe. Absinthe is a cordial. It's actually a mixture of many different herbs, but it had a lime green color to it and a licoricey type taste, and it was a very strong, like 150% alcohol. And it was very popular among French artists in the 1800s. And they, the rumor was, it gave him all kinds of visions and made him see things, and that's where we get impressionist painting from. Um, well, really, probably didn't have a whole lot to do with the wormwood. The thujone is the volatile oil in they were just seeing things because they were drinking a lot of 150 proof alcohol. I mean, Van Gogh was one of those guys. He was known to even drink paint thinner. So I wouldn't blame the wormwood for that, but it is very important. Never ever use wormwood essential oil internally. A lot of people have tried to make their own absinthe by taking the essential oil and putting it in vodka and adding other ingredients, and they go insane and die. Okay, you don't want to do that. Really, that thujone in that concentrated form is deadly, and in nature it doesn't occur that way. So again, very few essential oils should ever be taken internally. None should ever be used without cutting it with, a neutral oil. But very important when we talk about the wormwoods, don't go looking up absinthe and thinking, "Ooh, I want to make some of this." Yeah, you can. You can make a nice infused beverage using these herbs in their natural state. You're just basically making a tincture, essentially, and kind of sweetening it up, and that's called an infused, basically a gin, really. But use the real plant. Don't order something online and don't take anybody's advice that tells you to, because that's really dangerous. Okay, but the southernwood is one that's very rarely talked about anymore. Southernwood is also one of the oldest herbs used by mankind, and it's really interesting. I first ran across mention of it in what is, to my knowledge, the very first herbal, written after the Greek and Roman period. This is from 800 AD by really the first well known of the Benedictine monks who was an herbalist. As I've explained before, the Benedictines, especially, but all the different monastic medicine traditions, these were monks and nuns and priests, preserved herbal medicine throughout the Middle Ages. We've got Hippocrates, Pliny, Galen, Theophrastus, Dioscorides. Those were the main Greek and, well, yeah, mostly Greek, but some in the Roman period herbalists. And they're still the basis, the foundation of our entire understanding in the Western world of herbal medicine. And, I reference Dioscorides all the time. But, as Rome became an empire and then fell, all that information, all that knowledge would essentially have been lost were it not for the monks and the nuns and the priests in the Middle Ages who, could read Latin and Greek and preserved those books. I mean, there are even stories in the you know, early 1900s of people going to these little remote villages, usually in the Alps, and to a priest or a monk who was, famous for his herbal medicine, and he'd pull out like a 400-year-old copy, handwritten copy of Dioscorides, De Materia Medica, with hand-drawn illustrations of each plant. So this is who preserved the tradition and the knowledge of herbal medicine well into the modern era. And that's where our tradition of German folk medicine still comes from. Well, around 800 AD, Walafrid Strabo, he was an abbot, wrote a beautiful book called Hortulus. It's funny. It's it was written all in poetry. He had a good sense of humor, and it's all about the herbs that he grew in his little garden as he retired. He had been the tutor to the family of Charlemagne. He was one of the greatest minds of the time, and he wrote of southernwood. Admire too the tall bushes of southernwood with their bloom of down and the sharp spikes which grow on its wealth of branches like the finest hair. It is good to mix the scented sprigs plucked with the supple stem into healing medicines. It has power against fevers, banishes stitch, that's pain in the side, by the way. And if your limbs ache with the elusive and mysterious pain of gout, it would bring relief. Indeed, as many virtues it has as its strands of foliage. So, what they called gout at the time, we would call arthritis. He was recommending southernwood, which is one of the artemisias for arthritis. The artemisias never fail to surprise. Um, right now we're dealing with COVID, still dealing with COVID 2 years into this so-called pandemic. this is by no means the first viral epidemic we've ever had. Spanish flu epidemic, I guess it was almost 100 years ago now, killed, I believe, 100 million people. Way, way worse than COVID. Okay, way worse. And it mainly killed young people. Older people had experience with a similar variant of the flu, and their immune systems could fight off the swine flu better. But younger people would literally get up in the morning, healthy, go to school, go to work, and suddenly get sick and drop dead that same day. It was just a horrible epidemic. There was an artemisia found known as Sweet Annie. Sweet Annie is powerfully antiviral. In this day and age, everyone who has any knowledge of herbal medicine should be growing Sweet Annie in their garden or in a pot in the house if your climate isn't suitable. We need antiviral herbs like this more now than ever, and obviously we cannot count on the pharmaceutical industry to provide them to us. Why? Well, plants are free. There may be a lot of altruistic people in medicine and the pharmaceutical industry, but when you take out the ability to make money off of a drug, off of a pill, you take away all incentive for them to make it. So you're never going to go to your doctor and he say, "Oh, hey, there's this artemisia. It's called Sweet Annie. You should take this. It'll probably help you with the flu or any other virus," right? No, you're going to have to do that yourself, and that's one definitely be growing. All right, now we can get to Chrysanthemum, also a member of this family. And the oxeye daisy is probably the chrysanthemum we most use herbally. Imported from Europe, the leaves are edible. A tea of the herb is diuretic and astringent, useful in predictable ways for stomach ulcers and bloody piles or urine. It is also used as a vaginal douche for cervical ulceration. The daisy is aromatic and is used as an antispasmodic for colic and digestive upset. So, not only does the oxeye daisy kind of look like a big version of chamomile, in many ways it's used similarly. And this is one you'll see growing wild all over the place. It's one that has become a weed. But you can get seeds for it and grow it in the garden. I have. Next is pineapple weed. This is Matricaria. Pineapple weed is a sweet-smelling herb often found in lawns and driveways. Fresh plant is edible. It is an excellent tea, similar to but milder than chamomile. It is listed as diaphoretic, antispasmodic, stimulant, and sedative. It is a mild remedy safe for children, useful for stomach pains, colds, and fevers, and as a menstrual stimulant. It is also a lactose stimulant. The tea is said to aid in delivering the placenta. The aromatic constituents act as a mild anesthetic and antispasmodic to the mouth and stomach. It is also carminative and anti-inflammatory. Some species are not aromatic. I don't actually have any pineapple weed growing in my area, but yeah, it looks like one I might want to look into growing. And the last one we're going to discuss is an herb of some controversy, we could say, tansy. Now, tansy is another one of those old herbs that's been used as long as mankind has been using herbs. And used correctly, it's very useful. It can be toxic, and now everyone just basically warns you don't use tansy. Well, I still think there's a place for tansy in my herb garden. Tansy is another introduced herb. It's not native to this country. He says, Mr. Elpel says, it is now considered a noxious weed in many parts of the country. It contains a bitter principle plus resins, volatile oils, tannic and gallic acids, gums, lime, and lead oxide, among other things. In small doses, the tea is used as a diaphoretic and a minagogue. In large doses, it can cause convulsions, vomiting, reduced heart function, and coma. So that's why most people say don't use it. It should not be used at all without much additional research and should never be used during pregnancy. Obviously, that's one that I'm not going to recommend you use. It's one we're going to say use with care if you use it at all. Why is it so important to mention it? Because the plant looks very similar to yarrow. The main difference, remember how I told you the flowers of yarrow form basically a flowering inflorescence, a flowering head that looks somewhat like wild carrot if you were just look at it quickly and not pay much attention, but they're actually individual flowers. It's not that big umbel. Tansy has more distinctive flowers. You wouldn't look at it and think, well, that's a wild carrot, if you just glance at it. You would see the individual flowers. They're like little balls of flowers. Similar patterned, but more distinctive flowers, and often yellow. So, and it's a pretty plant actually. They're a nice bright yellow. In fact, sitting here right beside me is an old book I pulled off the shelf the other day. I like to go back and reread books from time to time, and this one I have had this book for over 20 years. Bradford and Jeer's Field Guide to Medicinal Wild Plants. It's an excellent field guide, and on the cover, he has tansy. It has the individual flower heads that are kind of like ball shaped. And if you were to compare the leaf of tansy to the leaf of yarrow, you would notice that the tansy leaves are far more simple. They're not comprised of millions of little fringy-like plants, but they're also fern-like. Seen side by side, they're very easy to tell apart. But obviously, if you have a question, you need to grab a book like Botany in a Day or a good field guide. And let's see what Mr. Angier wrote about tansy. Let's see, he said the perennial tansy grows in clumps of erect, unbranched stems 2 to 3 feet high. It has pungent, strongly aromatic fern-like foliage, some 4 inches wide and about 7 inches long, with jagged, toothed leaflets. Its flowers, green and inconspicuous, top the handsomely hardy plant and develop from July to September into clustering heads of flat, round, tubular, button-like, that's a good word to describe it, button-like, orangish yellow flowers that live several weeks and then dry into a dark golden beauty. The essential oil distilled from tansy has been used as an insect repellent. Taken internally, it can cause a miscarriage and can be fatal. Yeah, you'd never want to take the essential oil of any plant internally in most circumstances, but certainly not tansy because you'll die. Toxic to man and animals when eaten. Tansy concoctions taken internally had to be used sparingly and with great caution. The flowering tops were also employed to make a tea to promote menstruation. In small doses, the decoctions of the blossoms and leaves were used to kill and expel worms, and as a tonic and narcotic, both as a stomatic to strengthen the digestive system and to increase appetite, or inducing perspiration on the dry skin of fever in patients, to quiet hysteria, to assist convalescents in regaining their strength, to encourage sleepiness, to help kidney disturbances, to cleanse the lower intestines for a number of female complaints, and to help gallbladder sufferers, and even for jaundice. It was also used as a substitute for pepper in the making of the liqueur chartreuse, and used sparingly because of its strong aroma. And let's see, he says the plants were once hung in colonial kitchens to dry for such uses and to help keep insects away. They were also strewn on floors for the latter reasons. They also believed that tansy would increase fertility and help with skin eruptions and all kinds of stuff. So you see, tansy was once considered a very useful plant. In fact, in the old beer making traditions, tansy was also used as a bittering agent, much like mugwort. But it was one of those that was discouraged from being used because obviously it was very dangerous. And they said it could even produce sort of like a hysteria and really bad hangovers. So one of the reasons people switched to hops. But just to tell you how he differentiates tansy from yarrow, which, like I said, they're not that hard to tell apart. I'll give you the description real quick. He says, once smelled, the aromatically lacy foliage and flat top terminal flowers of yarrow will ever after be recognized. I agree with that. I often smell it before I see it. The almost always white blossoms are very rarely yellow and even more occasionally purple. They are small, developing in the spring and summer into convex clusters, sometimes convex clusters. Yeah, that's a good way to say it. It's not like an umbel on a wild carrot, but a convex cluster. The complex leaves are made up of very small entities on small stems branching off of single stalks, growing alternately. There are also many times clustered at the bottom and usually less than 3 feet high central stems. Finely dissected, they are linear to narrow spatulate or lanceolate. The foliage as a whole often seems grayish from the numerous small hairs. That's true. When you look at it, it's a deep, dull green with a gray tinge to it. And the uses he gives are pretty much the same as everyone else. He also mentions, though, that yarrow root, and this was something Michael Moore said in his class, is a good oral anesthetic, really good for toothache or other mouth pain. What you do in that case, you take yarrow roots and you basically pickle them in brandy. And when you have a problem, you take one out and chew on it. He knew of a Nevada Indian who was suffering acutely from a deep thigh wound in which foreign substances had entered the cut. Fresh scrubbed yarrow roots were crushed into a soft spongy mass and gently applied to the spot. Within half an hour, the anesthetic had so dulled the pain that it was possible to expand and clean the wound. I had never heard of it for use on pains and wounds, but it stands to reason that it would. It says the second instance concerned a deeply sunk splinter that, following soaking in the solution of yarrow roots, was similarly opened and removed. This was accomplished by a member of the family. Not only fresh poultices, but washes in which the leaves and stems were also boiled and used in similar cases after battle accidents. The entire plant often reduced to a paste, spread it over newly set fractures, and bound in place with fresh dandelion leaves. Yarrow has the quality of acting as a coagulant, good for stopping bleeding. Poultices used on bruises, abrasions, burns, and scalds. Good styptic. It says the styptic characteristics of yarrow were resorted to for all kinds of nicks and cuts, even those from a pioneer's razor. The leaves were reported to heal inflammations, eczema, rashes, infections, and the like. Yarrow tea applied to sore nipples. Yarrow leaves used as a wash for irritated eyes from dust or glare, snow blindness. Swellings are bathed in the tea. Good for poison ivy and poison oak and general itching. Good for gout. Yarrow is just an incredibly useful herb with so many virtues, as we call it. He goes on for about 4 pages, and I won't read all that out loud to you. But if you're interested in that book, again, that's the Field Guide to Medicinal Plants by Bradford Angier. It was published in 1978, and Bradford Angier is one of those old-fashioned, eccentric outdoorsman, woodsman, kind of a George Herder type. He wrote a bunch of really good books, and highly recommend that one for your shelf. And also his Field Guide to Wild Edibles. And I think he wrote a couple of wild edibles cookbooks. I have those somewhere too, and books on cabin building and everything you need to be a woodsman in the Pacific Northwest or the middle of the country. He was just one of those great old characters. Good to have his stuff on your shelf. So, y'all, we covered a lot of ground in one plant family today. I think we'll wrap it up so as not to get overwhelmed. Have a great week, and I'll see you again next time. The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. Nothing I say or write has been evaluated or approved by the FDA. I'm not a doctor. The U.S. government does not recognize the practice of herbal medicine, and there is no governing body regulating herbalists. Therefore, I'm really just a guy who studies herbs. I'm not offering any advice. I won't even claim that anything I write or say is accurate or true. I can tell you what herbs have been traditionally used for. I can tell you my own experience and if I believe an herb has helped me. I cannot nor would I tell you to do the same. If you use an herb anyone recommends, you are treating yourself. You take full responsibility for your health. Humans are individuals and no two are identical. What works for me may not work for you. You may have an allergy, a sensitivity, an underlying condition that no one else even shares and you don't even know about. Be careful with your health. By continuing to listen to my podcast or read my blog, you agree to be responsible for yourself, for your own research, make your own choices, and not to blame me for anything ever.